When one of the most influential bishops in the black church throws a shot, the pews shake. But when that shot is aimed straight at Bishop T.D. Jakes, the giant of modern ministry, and he finally claps back, oh baby, the entire gospel world hits pause. In a moment that no one saw coming, Bishop J. Drew Sheard publicly challenged Jakes in a move so bold, so unexpected, that it set off a firestorm across pulpits, group chats, and gospel media. Now, the silence is shattered. Bishop T.D. Jakes has officially responded, not with anger, but with a calm that cuts deeper than any sermon. And what he said has leaders scrambling, fans divided, and critics stunned. This isn't just a disagreement, it's a spiritual showdown, one that's revealing egos, envy, and deeper divisions within the black church than anyone was ready to admit. Buckle up, because this isn't just drama, this is history in the making. And trust me, what Bishop T.D. Jakes just said has church pews rattling from Dallas to Detroit. For decades, Jakes has been a titan in modern ministry, a spiritual powerhouse, best-selling author, and global voice of faith. But in a world where black church leaders have historically stood united, a bold and unexpected line has just been crossed. The disruption? It came straight from Bishop J. Drew Sheard, presiding leader of the Church of God in Christ, COGIC, who didn't just whisper his critique behind closed doors. No, he said it loud enough for the gospel world to hear. And it wasn't subtle, it wasn't diplomatic, it was direct, and it struck a nerve. Now, the faith community is buzzing. Was this just a theological disagreement or the start of a deep rupture in the church's highest ranks? Whispers of envy, power struggles, and generational tension are surfacing. But just when the world thought Jakes would take the high road and stay silent, he broke it. Not through petty shade or online jabs, but with a response so measured, so spiritually charged, that it turned heads and silenced critics. What followed wasn't just a clapback, it was a masterclass in leadership, legacy, and spiritual authority. And this moment might change everything about how we see unity or division in the modern black church. We're dissecting everything in this video. What specifically did Bishop J. Drew Sheard say that rocked the gospel community? What was T.D. Jakes' reaction? And why did his initial silence sound as loud as his subsequent declaration? What does this signify for the leadership, cohesion, and impact of the black church in 2025? You won't believe what was said behind the pulpit. And what's being said off the record is even more startling. We are going to be dissecting this spiritual battle, so get your tea, your Bible, and perhaps a notepad. And believe me, things start to get interesting at this point. Let's now examine the main cause of this whole controversy. It all began with a service that was live-streamed from one of Bishop J. Drew Sheard's most recent appearances. There was no conference. The meeting wasn't behind closed doors. Thousands of people saw, heard, and recorded this public event. Bishop Sheard, who stood behind the pulpit mid-sermon, made what many saw as a crude jab at the mega ministry mentality of today. Let's also state that the room became visibly silent. His tone was keen, and his delivery was purposeful. This is the moment that began it all. Paraphrased, some people are transforming the church into a form of entertainment, positioning themselves more like superstars than pastors. Some of these so-called bishops care more about creating empires than creating human beings. The ministry isn't that. It's manipulation. The mere remark would have been sufficient to cause a disturbance. However, what made the target of the shade so obvious? He then used a quotation that specifically referenced a term that T.D. Jakes himself had made popular. You're free, so you can keep your wife. What about man? Organize yourself. Boom! That was personal, right there. The whispers in the room were audible. Even whether to play or remain silent was a mystery to the musicians. Additionally, the internet took off. Almost immediately, sermon snippets appeared on Instagram and TikTok. In order to determine whether Bishop Sheard was criticizing the entire Jake brand, fans began analyzing the phrase in relation to Jake's legacy. Because T.D. Jakes is more than just a preacher. Let's not overlook that. He is a symbol of culture. Millions of books have been sold, venues have been crowded, and women all over the world have felt seen, healed, and empowered thanks to his Woman Thou Art Freed franchise. However, using it as a punchline and publicly dismissing it struck a different chord. Some now attempted to defend Bishop Sheard by claiming that he wasn't specifically referring to Jakes. It was a broad critique of today's church industry culture. He is advocating for responsibility rather than confrontation. Let's face it though, that jab was loaded, deliberate, and particular. This is what exacerbated the situation. Bishop Sheard's remarks regarding the branding of pastors were not the first. He has already discussed how self-promotion, ostentatious conferences, and social media ministries make him uncomfortable. This time, though, he gave the movement a name. He gave the moment a name, and he named the man by default. And why now was the question that everyone started to ask. Jake, why? Why make it public? Was there something going on in the background? Was this a more serious dispute? Or was this just an instance of personal annoyance erupting in a highly visible setting? They don't want you to know the surprising part, though. According to some insiders, this was prearranged, that Bishop Sheard had become more uneasy about TD Jake's expansion into the media, fashion, business, and Hollywood industries outside of the church. Additionally, they assert that some bishops have been subtly wondering if Jake is still acting from a platform or the pulpit, and the first stroke might have been that remark or that shade. Bishop Sheard, however, obviously misjudged the impending tempest if he believed Jake would remain silent. TD, Jake Shakes' answer was the fire extinguisher. If Bishop J. Drew Sheard's sermon served as a spark, cool, collected, and extremely well calculated, this is when the exciting part begins. Contrary to popular belief, TD Jake did not clap back. No lengthy Facebook post, no passionate live stream, and no verbal sparring in public. Bishop Jake did what he always does best instead. Although he chose the morally right path, he left hints of the truth in his wake. Jake delivered the sermon at the Potter's house in Dallas a few days after the video clip went viral. To put it mildly, his message seemed extremely deliberate. The timing, tone, and subtle shade left no room for doubt, even if he never gave Sheard's name. After decades of feeding God's people, you don't react to every bark from the sidelines. Jake observed of Midsman, because the fruit always speaks louder than the fingers pointing at the tree. The congregation burst into cheers. Jake made it apparent right away that he saw the jab, wasn't intimidated, and continued. It's easy to attack what you don't understand, but when you're walking in your assignment, you don't waste time explaining it to people who weren't called to it. He added in a sermon about spiritual integrity and endurance through criticism. Mick dropped the translation. He's too busy walking with purpose to be amused by the drama. And, to be honest, that's what gave his response its impact. He didn't defend himself. He raised the discussion, and that's just what Jake has become known for in the gospel community. TD, Jake has perfected the art of spiritual diplomacy, regardless of your opinion of his tactics. He is able to preserve his tranquility, his heritage, and his brand without ever being petty. However, the pulpit was not the end of the story. Confirmation behind the scenes. Insiders close to the Potter's home claimed that Jake was fully aware of the drama playing out on the internet. According to sources, he was given transcripts, blog analyses, and snippets of Bishop Sheard's speech. Jake made it plain, let the work speak for itself. That statement apparently became the catchphrase among his ministry team that week, despite the fact that many in his camp wanted him to correct the record. By sharing old lectures, establishing a new community development project, and starting yet another mentorship program for religious leaders, he doubled down on material rather than publicly confronting the issue. That is, while others continued to talk, he continued to build. And that was the main thing that shook folks, because Jake not only preserved his reputation, but also enhanced it by avoiding being drawn into a public dispute. On Instagram, he reminded people of what makes him unique among pastors. He is a worldwide bishop, a brand, and a movement. To be clear, his remark was tactful, but it was also calculated. Legacy speaks louder than controversy. He reminded his audience. He made it plain that productivity is more important than notoriety. Most significantly, he did not even need to punch to remind the gospel community that he is still the heavyweight champion. Here's the twist though. The criticism continued despite Jake's composure. Actually, the volume just increased. The focus is no longer solely on the two bishops now that they have each given their say, one with polished restraint and the other with public shade. It affects every aspect of the Black Church's leadership structure, and a widening gap is what's simmering beneath the surface. There is more to this than one lecture or one clapback, so let's dissect it all. This concerns the public collision of two very divergent conceptions of ministry. Bishop J. Drew Sheard, who is a traditionalist in many respects, is on one side. He maintains the significance of doctrine, denomination, and heritage institutions, and has his roots in the historic Church of God in Christ. People who think ministry should be conducted with a strong spiritual focus, less personal branding, and close ties to denominational responsibility view him as a gatekeeper of the old guard. Bishop T. Dakes, a trailblazer of contemporary faith-based influence, is on the opposing side. He is a multimedia juggernaut, business tycoon, best-selling author, and filmmaker who has spearheaded the transformation of ministry into a globally marketable media-driven enterprise. Additionally, a long-standing conflict that has been gradually simmering in Black church circles for years has been rekindled by these two bumping into each other. Is the pastor of today still a shepherd, or is he now a famous person? Let's hear what members of the church and other spiritual leaders have to say. Responses from fans. Team Sheard versus Team Jake. Social media is quite polarized. Jake is receiving support from some followers who describe him as the epitome of visionary leadership. TD Jake has done more for the kingdom worldwide than the majority of bishops combined, according to comments on Instagram and TikTok. Sheard sounds archaic and resentful. While everyone else is trapped, Jake is changing. We require leaders who are aware of current events. Jake understands. However, not everyone is persuaded. Bishop Sheard's ardent fans are praising his courage in opposing what they refer to as celebrity Christianity. Sermons supporting Sheard's traditional attitude are being shared by many COGIC supporters who post comments like "The pulpit ain't a platform. The purpose is not branding, it's for Bible." Jake is only answerable to his media team. We are grateful that Bishop Sheard pointed out this absurdity, and the actual tension is there. Responsibility. Because there is a legitimate question at hand, regardless of your feelings for TD Jake, that is responsible for a leader that soars to such heights? Jake doesn't belong to any one religion. He is not answerable to a typical church system board of elders. He is accountable to his vision, his team, and, of course, his calling. However, that is insufficient for people who value hierarchy, organization, and doctrinal purity. They think that unbridled influence can cause boundaries to become hazy, and they perceive Bishop Jake as someone who is acting on his own initiative in ways that unnerve the establishment. Pastoral and clerical voices are heard. Increasingly, but quietly, more pastors have begun to share their thoughts. One pastor said, "This isn't personal," while other prominent church leaders have turned to panels and podcasts to remark. This rift exposes a generational and philosophical clash that's been waiting to erupt. The Black church is being forced to consider how we define success and who gets to steer the debate, and it's prophetic. The older circles are deeply concerned that contemporary pastors like Jake's are establishing a new paradigm in which the church follows the man rather than the mission. According to another minister, notably, neither bishop has declared that they are at war. The church community is reading between every line, every sermon, and every Instagram caption. And while this isn't a public dispute in the sense of reality TV, their silence says volumes. There are more than two men involved. There are roughly two movements. One that values order, modesty, and spiritual tradition. One that is committed to growth, impact, and using all available means to reach the world. What will happen then if those two clash in front of millions of people? Disagreement, debate, and serious concerns about leadership's future. But where do we go from here is the most crucial question, because it's obvious that the Black church is about to undergo a sea change, whether you're on the sidelines or on Jake or Sheard's side. In our last chapter, we also examine what needs to happen in order to proceed with clarity, unity, and a genuine kingdom emphasis. The shade is visible to us. The response has been received. The impact has been felt in pulpit circles, social media timelines, and churches. Now, however, comes the most crucial query of all. From here, where do we go? Because although it would be simple to write this off as church drama or write it off as a personality conflict between two influential leaders, the reality is that this moment exposes something far more profound. It's impossible to overlook the friction between culture and religion that has been building for decades. First, let's address the obvious. There is division, not only between TD Jakes and J. Drew Sheard, but also between generations of Christians, between younger believers seeking God in a society dominated by power, platforms, and branding, and between older saints brought up in rigid church traditions. And if this instance might have further shattered the community, it might also have been a heavenly chance for reconciliation and open dialogue. What must occur next? Open communication. We must stop whispering and begin speaking aloud and lovingly if we want healing to occur. Church leaders must get together in open venues where genuine issues can be discussed without fear, ego, or rivalry, as well as behind closed doors. Is it improper for a ministry to become a worldwide brand? In the era of social media celebrity, how do we safeguard spiritual integrity? Who is responsible for independent pastors? Is it possible for outdated structures to adapt to new ministry models? If the church is to be relevant and cohesive, these are the discussions that need to take place. A plea for harmony without homogeneity. Let's be honest, Sheard and Jake are from different ideas, different denominations, and different lanes. However, being different need not equate to being divided. Both the conservative and the trailblazer have a place in the kingdom. For the pastor who quietly leads a physical church and the one who creates internet empires. Mutual regard for each leader's contributions and a knowledge that the mission ultimately transcends the individual are necessary for the influencing bishop and the doctrine-heavy overseer. And followers can help with that. Fans can easily stoke the flames, Team Sheard, Team Jake, and the conflicts in the comments section. But what if we all choose the higher route rather than picking sides? What if we insisted that our leaders treat one another with respect and hold each other accountable? More significantly, what if we had the same expectations of ourselves? Because this is a harsh reality. If the pulpits are silent and the pews are divided, the church cannot heal. The following generation's role. As this is happening, a growing number of younger pastors, evangelists, and believers are following along. This experience will influence their leadership style and perspective. Will they continue the pattern of quiet in private and public criticism? Or will they create a new legacy where bishops work together rather than against each other? One that is based on spiritual depth and cultural relevance? Some young leaders have already taken to the internet to advocate for a new council of voices that encompasses urban, traditional, and digital perspectives, theological, to unite and map out a future course. And to be honest, we need that enthusiasm. One last thing about healing. The fact that this incident has opened a conversation between Jake and Sheard is more important than whether they ever meet in person or publicly reconcile. We're thinking now. We are now posing actual queries. That marks the start of the resurgence, not in yelling contests or online disparaging, but in sincere, modest, and spirit-driven responsibility. These two guys, J. Drew Sheard and T.D. Jake Jakes, have had a generational impact. They have transformed lives, established ministries, trained leaders, and saved souls. Both of these are essential. However, the church now more than ever needs unified voices in addition to strong ones.